Rain has a memory. Even now, at 28 years old, living in a warm apartment far away from that town, I can't hear rain hit glass without my chest tightening. It drags me backward through time, straight to the night my father decided I was disposable. I was 15, no coat, no phone, no money, just a thin backpack hanging from one shoulder and water already soaking through my shoes. Those were the last moments I belonged anywhere. It was October. The kind of cold that doesn't announce itself politely. It sneaks under your skin. I came home from school thinking about homework, dinner, whether I'd done well on my algebra test. Normal thoughts, safe thoughts, the kind you have when you don't know your life is about to split clean in half. The second I opened the front door, I felt it. The air was wrong. My father stood in the living room, rigid, like something coiled too tightly. His face was red, not with anger, yet something more dangerous. Certainty. In one hand, he held crumpled bills. In the other, empty pill bottles that rattled softly when his fingers trembled. Behind him stood my older sister. She looked worried, devastated, the picture of concern. But I saw her eyes. They weren't scared. They were calm. My father didn't let me speak, didn't ask where I'd been or how my day was. He accused me of stealing money, of using drugs, of lying to his face for months. Every word hit me like ice water. I tried to deny it, but the room felt like it was shrinking, pressing the air out of my lungs. My sister stepped forward, voice trembling just enough to sound real. She said she'd tried to protect me, said she couldn't stay quiet anymore, said she'd found the evidence. My stepmother stayed in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching, silent, always silent. That was when I knew it was over. My father grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door. I didn't fight. I couldn't. He shoved my backpack into my chest so hard I stumbled backward. Then he opened the door. Rain poured down in sheets. Wind cut straight through my clothes. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Get out of my house. I don't need a sick daughter." Then he pushed me onto the porch. The door slammed. The lock clicked. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for someone to open it again, waiting for this to be a mistake. No one came. So I stepped off the porch and into the storm, not knowing that 3 hours later, the police would call my father, and that whatever they told him would drain every bit of color from his face. But by then, it would already be too late. The first thing I noticed once I stepped off the porch was how loud the rain was. It drowned everything. My thoughts, my breathing, even the sound of my own footsteps as I walked down the driveway and onto the empty road. I kept expecting the front door to open behind me. Any second now, I told myself. Any second he'll realize he made a mistake. The road stayed dark. A notebook, 2 pencils, my math book, no phone. No wallet, not even a sweater. I laughed once, sharp and hollow, because the absurdity of it felt unreal. 15 years old, and my entire life fit into a bag that weighed less than my school books. I didn't know where to go. My grandmother lived 7 miles away. I'd only walked that far once, on a sunny summer day, with friends and music and energy to burn. That night, in the cold and rain, it felt like another country. At first, I moved quickly, arms wrapped around myself, head down, counting steps to stay focused. Rain soaked through my clothes within minutes, turning my jeans heavy and cold. My hair plastered to my face, and every gust of wind felt like a slap. By the second mile, my fingers stopped hurting. That scared me more than the pain. I couldn't feel them anymore. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights slicing through the darkness, then vanishing. No one slowed down. No one stopped. I don't blame them. I must have looked like a shadow, something not quite real. My thoughts began to drift. I replayed my father's words over and over, searching for something I could have said differently, something that would have made him choose me. Each step felt heavier than the last, my shoes squelching with every movement. Halfway there, my legs started to shake. I told myself I'd just rest for a minute, just lean against the fence of a closed gas station and breathe. My breath came out in short, wide bursts, my teeth chattering so hard my jaw hurt. I tried to text my grandmother before remembering I didn't have my phone. That was when panic set in. Not loud panic, quiet, Sinking panic. The kind that whispers that you've made a terrible mistake and there's no undoing it. I stood up too fast, dizziness washing over me. The world tilted. The rain blurred the road until it all looked the same gray and endless. My feet dragged now. I wasn't walking so much as falling forward, step by step. The last clear thought I remember was this: if I sit down, I might not get back up. I don't remember falling. I remember cold, bone deep, swallowing cold. And then, nothing. When I opened my eyes again, bright white light burned into them, and a machine somewhere nearby beeped steadily. My body felt heavy, wrapped in warmth I hadn't realized I needed so badly. A woman sat beside the bed. She had gray hair pulled back neatly and eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. She looked at me and said, very calmly, "You're safe now." That was the moment I realized I'd survived the night, and that my father was about to get a phone call he never expected. I didn't believe her at first. When the woman said I was safe, I nodded because that's what you do when you're too tired to argue. My throat felt raw. My head throbbed, and my limbs were wrapped in blankets so tight I could barely move. The room smelled like disinfectant and something faintly sweet, like plastic and warmth mixed together. Hospital. That much I understood. A nurse came in, checked the 4 in my arm, and spoke in a quiet voice about hypothermia and dehydration. Words floated over me without fully landing. I stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together how I'd gotten here. The rain, the road, the cold, then nothing. The woman stayed seated the entire time. She didn't rush me. When the nurse left, the woman leaned forward slightly. "My name is Margaret Hale," she said. "I found you on the side of the road." That made my chest tighten. I tried to apologize for being there, for being trouble, for existing. The words tangled together, and tears spilled out before I could stop them. I hated that part, the crying. It felt weak, dangerous. Margaret handed me a tissue and waited. So I told her, not all at once, in pieces, broken sentences. I told her about the accusations, the money, the pills, about my sister's trembling voice and my father's cold certainty, about the door slamming and the lock clicking like punctuation at the end of my childhood. She said, "I believe you." 2 words. They landed harder than anything else that night. She explained she was retired from Child Protective Services. She'd been driving home late when she saw a shape on the roadside that didn't move. Something in her told her to stop. If she hadn't, she said, I might not have made it through the night. Then she asked if I had anywhere safe to go. I shook my head. That's when she stood up. "I'm going to make some calls," she said. "And you're not going back there." Fear spiked in my chest. "He'll be angry," I whispered. Margaret met my eyes. "That's no longer your problem." Police officers arrived first. Gentle. Serious. They asked me questions, took notes, and left the room several times to make phone calls of their own. A social worker followed, then another nurse. The room felt crowded, but for the first time, not suffocating. Sometime near dawn, Margaret returned with an older woman behind her. My grandmother. She looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a thick coat, her hair wild from the wind. But her eyes, those were the same. Sharp, furious, loving. She crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled me into her arms, careful of the 4, whispering my name over and over like a prayer. Behind her, I saw the door open again. My father stepped inside. His face was pale, his eyes darting. From the police officers to the hospital bed to my grandmother standing like a shield in front of me. He opened his mouth to speak, and Margaret stepped forward and said, calmly and clearly, "Sir, you need to listen very carefully. Whatever came next would change everything." My father didn't look like a man who expected consequences. He stood just inside the hospital room, rain still clinging to his coat, his eyes darting around as if he'd walked into the wrong place. Police officers, a social worker, my grandmother holding my hand like she'd never let go again. And me, alive. Margaret positioned herself between us without raising her voice. "You were contacted because your minor child was found unconscious on the side of a road in severe weather conditions," she said. "We need to talk about why." He glanced at me, then quickly away, as if I were evidence he didn't want to see. He muttered something about discipline and hard choices, words that sounded rehearsed. My stepmother wasn't with him. I noticed that immediately. The social worker asked him to explain why I had no phone, no jacket, and nowhere to go. He hesitated. That hesitation spoke louder than any answer. My grandmother stepped forward then. She was shaking, but her voice was steady. "You threw a child out into a storm," she said. "Your child?" My father bristled, anger flashing across his face. "She's not telling you everything." Margaret nodded once. "That's why we'll be investigating." Those words hit him like a physical blow. An officer asked about the money he'd found. The pills, the accusations. My father repeated what my sister had told him, his tone defensive now uncertain. "From what?" the officer asked. Silence. The social worker explained that until the investigation concluded, I would not be returning to his home. Temporary custody would be placed with my grandmother. I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time since the door had slammed shut behind me. My father's eyes widened. "You can't do that." "We already are," she replied. Paperwork appeared. Forms. Signatures. My grandmother's name written, with firm strokes. My father's hand shook when he was told to sign acknowledgement forms. He looked at me once more, searching for something: fear, guilt, defiance. I gave him nothing. As he turned to leave, one of the officers stopped him. "Sir, you'll be hearing from us again." The door closed behind him, softer this time, but final all the same. Later that morning, as sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, Margaret sat beside my bed again. "This doesn't end today," she said gently, "but the truth has a way of surfacing." I wanted to believe her. 2 days later, the truth started screaming. Detectives visited my sister at her college apartment. Bank records were requested, security footage reviewed, timelines examined, and cracks began to appear. Withdrawals I couldn't have made, purchases I'd never seen, dates that placed my sister, not me, at the center of everything. The golden child's perfect image started to fracture. By the end of the week, my father received another call. This one didn't ask questions. It answered them. And for the first time in his life, he realized he had thrown the wrong daughter into the storm. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, sharp and undeniable, each one cutting deeper than the last. While I recovered at my grandmother's house, detectives and social workers moved quietly in the background. I could hear their names mentioned in hushed phone calls, see my grandmother's jaw tighten whenever she hung up. She never told me everything, only what I needed to know, but I could feel the shift. Something was happening. The first crack appeared in the bank records. The money my father had accused me of stealing, withdrawn in cash on days I was at school. Security footage showed a familiar face at the ATM. My sister's hair pulled into the same neat ponytail she'd worn for years. Calm, confident. The second crack came from the pharmacy. The pills weren't mine. They were prescribed to my sister's boyfriend, filled at a location near her apartment, reported missing 2 days after I was thrown out. Too late to be coincidence. Then came the phone, a cheap prepaid phone, purchased with cash. The receipt was still in the store system. Time stamped. The buyer caught on camera. Not me. Every piece told the same story. Not of a troubled younger daughter spiraling out of control. When my father was confronted with the evidence, he denied it at first. He said there must be a mistake, that the footage was unclear, that people were jumping to conclusions. But evidence doesn't argue. It waits. The final blow came when investigators reviewed 2 years of financial activity tied to my father's accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger. Forged signatures, checks written in cash without his knowledge, tens of thousands of dollars, all traced back to my sister. I wasn't there when my father learned the full truth, but I heard about it later. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at paperwork spread out like a crime scene, his hands shaking. The daughter he'd trusted without question, the one he'd defended, the one he'd believed over me, gone. Court dates followed quickly. I attended every one, sitting beside my grandmother, my hands folded in my lap. My sister avoided looking at me. She looked smaller now, stripped of certainty. The confident mask she'd worn for years finally gone. The judge didn't raise his voice when he spoke. He didn't need to. Fraud. Theft. identity misuse, endangering a minor. The words echoed in the courtroom. My sister was sentenced to probation, ordered to pay restitution, and issued a permanent restraining order against contacting me. Her future narrowed to a thin, unforgiving line. My father's consequences were quieter but deeper. He lost custody permanently. The judge called his actions what they were: abandonment. When the gavel struck, I didn't feel victory. I felt relief. Because for the first time since that night in the rain, the truth wasn't just known, it was official. And yet, as I would soon learn, justice doesn't end pain. Sometimes it only clears the way for something else to begin. Life didn't magically become easy once the truth came out. It became quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a storm when everything looks the same, but feels unfamiliar. I moved into my grandmother's small house full-time, carrying what little I owned in 2 trash bags. Clothes she bought for me, school supplies replaced by neighbors who'd heard what happened, a borrowed jacket that smelled faintly of lavender. I slept on the couch at first, not because there wasn't a bed, but because every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that porch, rain stinging my face, the door locking behind me. The couch felt safer, closer to the light. My grandmother never rushed me. She cooked real meals, sat with me while I ate, asked about school without pushing. Every morning, she reminded me to breathe, as if I might forget how. The hardest part wasn't the loss of my father. It was losing the idea of him. I grieved a version of a man who didn't exist, the one who would have believed me, protected me, chosen me. That grief came in waves, sometimes knocking the air out of my lungs when I least expected it. School was brutal at first. Rumors travel faster than truth in small towns. Some people whispered, others stared. A few avoided me altogether, as if betrayal were contagious. I kept my head down and focused on survival. Therapy became part of my routine. At first, I hated it. Talking felt dangerous. But slowly, words stopped hurting so much. I learned that what happened to me had a name: trauma. That my fear wasn't weakness, it was my body remembering. Months passed, then a year. I grew taller, stronger, quieter in a different way. I worked part-time after school, saving money, learning independence early. My grandmother taught me how to budget, how to stand my ground, how to trust my instincts. She never badmouthed my father. She didn't need to. Reality spoke for itself. On my 18th birthday, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a key. My house will always be yours, she said, but this key is for your future. It wasn't to a place. It was to choice. I graduated, left town, built a life piece by piece, brick by brick, far away from slammed doors and raised voices. I learned how to feel safe again, how to laugh without flinching, how to let people close without expecting them to disappear. Years passed, and just when I believed that chapter of my life was truly over, a letter arrived in my mailbox written in a hand I recognized immediately. My father's. He was dying, and he wanted to see me. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The return address was a nursing home 2 towns over from where I'd grown up. The handwriting was uneven, like the pen had slipped more than once. I recognized it instantly. My father's writing had always been sharp, controlled. This wasn't that. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I'd imagined this moment before, angry, tearful, dramatic. Instead, I felt distant, like I was reading someone else's mail. Inside was a single sheet of paper. He didn't waste words. He wrote that he was sick, that his body was failing faster than expected. That time was short. He said he thought about me every day, that he carried regret like a weight he couldn't set down. He apologized over and over, using my name as if repetition might make it stick. At the bottom, he asked to see me, just once. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I sat there, listening to the hum of my refrigerator, the normal sounds of a life he had never been part of. I didn't cry. I called my grandmother. She listened quietly as I read the letter out loud. When I finished, she said only one thing: "What do you want?" That question haunted me for days. I wasn't angry anymore. I'd spent years burning through that emotion until there was nothing left but ash. But forgiveness? That was different. Forgiveness felt like something people asked for when they wanted relief, not responsibility. I went to work, met friends, lived my life. And still, the letter stayed on my kitchen table, silent but heavy. One night, I dreamed of the porch, Not the rain, just the door. Locked. I woke up knowing the answer. I didn't go for him. I went for me. The nursing home smelled like antiseptic and overcooked vegetables. The halls were quiet, lined with photographs of people who looked nothing like who they'd been. A nurse led me to his room and knocked once before opening the door. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, fragile. His hair almost completely gray. When he saw me, his face crumpled in a way that made something tighten in my chest despite myself. He cried, not politely, not quietly. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it. I was wrong, he said. I chose wrong. I listened. I didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't correct his version of events. I let him speak until he ran out of words, because this wasn't about proving anything anymore. When he finished, I told him I forgave him, not because he deserved it, because I deserved peace. I stood up, kissed his forehead, and walked out of the room without looking back. At the nurse's station, as I signed out, one of them hesitated before speaking. He hasn't asked to see anyone else, she said quietly. Not even your sister. I nodded. Some consequences last longer than anger, and some apologies come too late to change anything, but not too late to close a door gently, instead of slamming it. I expected to feel lighter when I left the nursing home. Instead, I felt hollow, not empty in a painful way, just cleared out, like a room after furniture has been removed. The memories were still there, faint outlines on the walls, but they no longer blocked the light. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. I realized something then. Forgiveness hadn't erased the past. It hadn't rewritten the night I was thrown into the storm. What it had done was loosen its grip. The story no longer owned me. I drove straight to the harbor. The wind was sharp, carrying the smell of salt and cold metal. I stood there watching the water, thinking about how many times I'd survived without realizing it. That walk, that hospital bed, those years of rebuilding myself from fragments. I hadn't just endured. I had chosen again and again to keep going. That night, I wrote everything down. Not for him, for me. I wrote about fear, about betrayal, about how silence can be louder than cruelty. I wrote about the people who stepped in when my parents stepped away. Margaret, my grandmother, strangers who chose kindness without being asked. Writing became a habit, then a purpose. I started sharing parts of my story in small support groups. At first, my voice shook, but every time I spoke, someone else nodded. Someone else said, that happened to me too. Pain, I learned, multiplies in silence, but it weakens when named. Months passed. Life expanded. I was promoted at work, moved to a better apartment, built friendships that felt steady, earned real. I laughed more freely, trusted more carefully, loved more deeply. And one day, a call came from my grandmother. My father had passed away. I felt sad but not shattered. I sent flowers. I didn't attend the funeral. Grief, I learned, doesn't have rules. Closure doesn't require a ceremony. What surprised me most came later, when I found out he'd made a final request. He asked that I receive his watch, the one he'd worn every day of my childhood. I held it in my hands, its weight unfamiliar, and understood what he'd meant. Time lost, misused, unreturnable. I didn't keep it. I donated it to a shelter fundraiser, where it was sold to support kids who had nowhere to go. Kids like I'd been. That felt right. I wasn't defined by what was taken from me anymore. I was defined by what I built. And as I stood in my apartment that night, rain tapping gently against the window, I realized something else. I wasn't afraid of the storm anymore, because I had become the kind of person who could walk through it and never disappear. Justice doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it's quiet, unremarkable. It shows up in the shape of a morning that doesn't hurt anymore, or a memory that no longer steals your breath. After my father's death, people expected something from me. Tears, anger, relief, some dramatic confession of how I felt. I offered none of it, not because I was hiding, but because I finally understood that I didn't owe anyone a performance of my healing. My sister never reached out. I heard about her life through fragments, mutual acquaintances, distant relatives who spoke carefully, as if her name were fragile. She'd moved states, changed jobs often, paid restitution slowly, grudgingly. She avoided family gatherings, avoided reminders, avoided me, and that was justice enough. She had spent years constructing a lie, and the rest of her life living around its ruins. No confrontation could have matched that. As for me, I kept building. I volunteered at a youth outreach program on weekends, mostly doing homework help at first. Kids with stories written in their shoulders and their silences. I never told them everything, just enough to let them know I understood. Understanding, I learned, is a form of protection. One night, a girl stayed behind after everyone else had left. She asked me how I'd known when to stop blaming myself. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, when I realized the story didn't start with me. That truth settled in her eyes like something she'd been waiting to hear. Moments like that rewrote my past more effectively than revenge ever could. I stopped wondering what would have happened if my father had believed me. Stopped imagining alternate versions of my life where none of this happened. Those thoughts had kept me tethered to a door that was never going to open. Instead, I focused on the life that did exist. The one where I chose kindness without becoming fragile. Where I trusted without being naive. Where I carried my past like a scar, proof of survival, not shame. On the anniversary of the night I was thrown out, I did something different. I walked in the rain, not to punish myself, not to remember pain, just to feel it on my terms. I wore a coat, warm boots. I stopped when I wanted to. I turned back when I chose. Control changes everything. As the years went on, the story of my childhood became something I owned, not something that owned me. I could tell it without shaking. I could pause. I could smile. Justice, I realized, isn't about watching someone fall. It's about standing somewhere they can never reach you again, and knowing that, no matter what they took, you built something stronger in its place. There was a time when I thought the storm would always be chasing me, that every good thing in my life would be temporary, fragile, waiting to be taken away the moment I relaxed. Trauma teaches you to brace even when nothing is coming. For years, I lived like that, alert, prepared, ready to lose everything again. But storms don't last forever. One evening, years after the nursing home, I stood by my window as rain slid down the glass. The sound was gentle, almost comforting. I realized I wasn't flinching. My shoulders weren't tight. My breath didn't catch in my throat. The rain had finally become just rain. I thought about the girl I used to be, 15 years old, standing barefoot on a porch, believing in that moment that being rejected meant being worthless. That silence meant guilt. That survival meant endurance alone. She was wrong. Survival was never about being strong enough to suffer quietly. It was about staying open long enough for help to find her. About letting belief replace blame. About walking forward even when the road disappeared beneath her feet. I didn't become successful out of spite. I became whole out of choice. I built a life where doors are never locked in anger, where voices don't rise to control, where love doesn't require fear to exist. I learned to choose people who choose me back without conditions, without tests. Sometimes I imagine what I would say if I could stand on that porch again, just for a moment. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't explain. I would turn around, walk into the rain, and know exactly where I was going. Because the truth is this: being thrown out didn't break me. Being believed saved me. And rebuilding myself taught me something no one could ever take away. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who refuses to leave you in the storm. If you're reading this and you're still walking, still cold, still unsure, still hoping someone will open a door, hear me clearly. You are not lost. You are not invisible. And this moment is not the end of your story. One day, the rain will fall softly again. And when it does, you'll realize something incredible. The storm didn't follow you. You walked out of it.